Hey, all, welcome to my Facebook Live for The Guy in the Glass, 6 questions to see the man you were meant to be. We're going to be digging in today to chapter 3. I've gone through the first 2 chapters on this journey over the past couple weeks. There's 6 total, there's conclusion, there's other things, but the bottom line is we're going to have 6 Facebook Lives, Instagram Lives, LinkedIn Lives, YouTube Lives, wherever you're catching us, welcome, because we are live. Or maybe you're watching this after the fact, and that's okay too. So I love comments, man. I just love the interaction with people. So feel free to jump in and participate, ask me questions. I really love it and can't say it strongly enough. Love to hear from you. The Guy in the Glass, 6 questions to see the man you were meant to be, came out maybe 3 weeks ago at this point. I don't know. But the bottom line is it's out. It is a passion project. It is a sort of the summary of my work. It is my personal journey. It's the story of my father. It's the story of Viktor Frankl. It's the story of really men. And I use a lot of my coaching stories from men who have given me permission to use their story. Sometimes it's composites, but it's all stuff that men go through on their journey of life, particularly at the midlife point, at the midlife crossroads. I call them life's T's: transitions, tests, trials, traumas, and tragedies. And when you come to one of these T's at any point in your life, but especially the midlife crossroads, we need a roadmap. We need direction. And I draw that direction from ancient wisdom, traditions, and text. I draw that wisdom from Kabbalah. That's the soil out of which I've come from, Jewish mysticism. That's sort of the framework through which I see the world. I draw from logotherapy. That's the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl. I'm a logotherapist. And that's applied wisdom. That is this man's distilled lessons of life out of the Holocaust, out of having survived that hell. And as he said, transforming tragedy into triumph. And so I have brought Kabbalah and logotherapy, the work of Viktor Frankl, and the Enneagram. I don't name the Enneagram in here, but it's in here in the blueprints of men. The Enneagram is an ancient wisdom roadmap. Most people think of it as a personality typing system. It's not that. Myers-Briggs is, StrengthsFinders is. The Enneagram is a spiritual roadmap. It is an energetic system. It is 2,000 years old. It grows out of spiritual tradition, probably Catholic mysticism. There's a lot of overlap in my tradition, Kabbalah. But the bottom line is it's tried, it's true. And I believe and I trust things that are ancient, things that are timeless, things that have withstood the test of time. And Kabbalah and Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and the Enneagram, man, it doesn't get any more tried and true than that. So I've woven it all together in the book, The Guy in the Glass, 6 questions to see the man you were meant to be. And that's what we're going to dig into right here, right now. The book is framed in a bar. It's a serious book. It deals with my father's suicide. It deals with Viktor Frankl's incarceration in Auschwitz. That's an introduction. It frames it because you got to know these extremes as men and what we're looking at. Most of us will never know those extremes of the, despair that led my father to his suicide, or the darkness that descended upon Viktor Frankl's life and so many others' life to incarcerate him into the concentration camps. But they present to us extremes so that we can learn that what's possible on either side of us. Most of us are going to live somewhere in the middle, but what they both teach us has a lot to inform us on how we navigate life, especially men, the second half of life. That's really where I'm most passionate, because there are so few roadmaps out there. There are so few examples of how to navigate this time in our life. And so it's a serious book, but it takes place in a very unserious context, setting, a bar. A man walks into a bar. Sounds like a joke. Could be a joke. There are lots of jokes in here, by the way. It's quite irreverent. The first version was more of the Wolf of Wall Street, and my editor said, Not if you want to sell books, not if you want to not get canceled. So I backed off of The Wolf of Wall Street and I just said it in a bar. And it is about a man who's at the midlife crossroads, 40 years old, who doesn't know which way to go. And he's at the bar and he's going to be asked 6 simple questions. These questions, however, are deep. They're consequential, and you know what they are, because if you've ever picked somebody up in a bar or anywhere for that matter, you've probably used these cheesy lines. And these lines are questions, and these questions, although shallow at one point in a man's life, become salvation in another point in a man's life. The first question, chapter 1, was, what's your name? You can watch that video. What's your name? It sounds so simple. It sounds like the first question you would ask or be asked at any setting, not just a bar, cocktail parties and boardrooms and anywhere in between. But it's not so simple. What's your name? You don't have a name. You have names. You have all kinds of names. The moment we get stuck in a name is the moment we're lost, is the moment that we are not living our highest self, our true self, because your true self can't be bound up in one little name tag. You have so many names. Literally, you have so many names. And this chapter will get you to think about those names. And figuratively, you have profound names within you, some yet to be spoken, to be born. Chapter 2, right? What's the second question we always get asked? What's your name? Chapter 2, what do you do? And this one, last Facebook Live, Instagram Live, I'll just call it live. And it is a question that we rattle off as men shamefully, how I make money. I don't ask guys, what do you do? I ask guys, what do you do for a living, if I want to know how you make, ends meet, how you pay your bills. But what do you do? And you answer with how you get a paycheck. But what about being a father and a son and a brother and an American or wherever you're from, and an artist and a poet? What do you do? Expand your identity as men. Go beyond one little fill in the name for you. Now we're into chapter 3. Chapter 3 is my favorite chapter, right? Maybe I'll say that about all of them, but it actually is my favorite chapter. Why? What's your name? What do you do? Come here often? Now it sounds so ridiculous. Ooh, got the chills. It sounds so ridiculous. Sounds so ridiculous, but come here often. In this chapter, we're going to dig into, what are we really being asked? Are you come here often? Is it a frequency conversation? How many times a week? Right? No. Come here often, at least as asked in this book, is, why are you here? Right? Why are you here? Why are you in this place? And as you go deeper into this book, you realize it's not a logistics conversation, it's an existential conversation. Why are you here in this world, in this flesh suit, in this life? Why are you here? Or to say it simply, what's your why? And that takes us into the heart of the book and to my work in this lifetime, personally and professionally. If you take away nothing from this book or from this conversation, take away this. A man without a why is lost in this world where there's so much competition for your attention. There's so much pining for your energy. There's so many paths in front of you all day, every day, that if we don't have a why, we get lost in the shuffle. We get lost in the storms. I counsel men for a living, and I can tell you this, that when a man is dealing with addiction, could be alcohol, could be porn, could be drugs, could be gambling. When a man is lost in a marriage, it's lonely and he doesn't know his way out. When a man is in a bad situation financially, when a man is hating his work, doesn't speak to him, doesn't call to him, the only thing I know for sure is he has lost his why. He has lost his meaning. He has lost his purpose. But I can't think of a better word than what's your why. And no, Simon Sinek didn't coin this idea. Great book, Start with Why. But he is not the OG why guy. That is my teacher, Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, in the Holocaust, his wife was murdered. His unborn child was murdered. His parents were murdered. His brother murdered. Family murdered. Friends murdered. They stripped him of his identity, of his possessions, of his profession. They took away everything, but they couldn't take away what he called the defiant power of the human spirit, his purpose, his essence, or as he would have called it, his why. And he said, paraphrasing Nietzsche, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. And that's the takeaway. A man without a why is lost. Maybe not right away, right? But eventually he will be. I call it cut flower syndrome. You know what cut flower syndrome is? You can cut flowers from the soil and they're alive, or they appear alive for a while. And you can put them in water and you can dump some of that chemical crap in there and you can prolong the inevitable. But the truth is, they were dying the moment you cut them from the soil. And that's a man. The moment he's cut from his why, he's disconnected from his why, he doesn't know his why, he is in the process of dying, of losing himself, of losing his way. A man without a why is a man that's headed towards danger, towards destruction, towards devastation eventually. Because guess what? Every security that a man has, a person has, a man has, is going to be stripped from him. Your houses, you will not have your house forever. You will not have your protections forever. Eventually, if you live a good life, you're going to be reduced, right, to your essence. You're going to lose your capacities, your physicality, and you're going to have something to hold on to through the storms. I counseled a man once who was going under. He was taking his final breaths, but he wasn't dying, not right away. He had ALS, and he could no longer function at a bodily level, but his mind was fully functioning. And what we worked on in those final weeks and months leading up to that moment, when he would have to shut his eyes and be alone with himself, was his why, was his purpose, literally to articulate it. That's what we're talking about here. I'm not talking about Hallmark cards. Do you know how many guys I ask, what's your why? Successful guys, guys who run companies, guys who would never operate their business without a vision statement, a mission statement, values, pillars, all of these things, slide decks to show me. And I say to them, that's awesome. That's a powerful why for your business. What's your why personally? Well, what? I've never really thought about it. Mountain Prana Breathwork is back. You are my number one fan, brother. I love you. A man would never run his company without that why. So why should he run his life without it, right? Be a father without a clearly articulated why. And I'm not talking about a bullshit why. To be a good dad, to be a kind person, to be a loving partner. Of course, that's a baseline, but that's about as meaningful as Miss America, is that still a thing? Saying she wants world peace, right? That's not enough. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sitting down, pen to paper, over days, months, years, decades, and getting into the why and exploring it and writing about it and testing it and talking about it, doing the Enneagram assessment around it and doing the VIA, the values and action assessment around it, and really digging in to know thyself. Not the bullshit version of the mask that I show to the world, but the true self, the true me, the guy in the glass. And that takes work. That takes digging into. It's taken me decades to get to my why. And it's refining and it's iterating, but I've really dialed it in. And I turn to it over and over again when I feel myself straying from myself, from the guy in the glass, the guy in the mirror, the true me. Because the truth is, we're all gonna stray. We're going to stray in our marriages. We're going to stray in our parenting. We're going to stray in our integrity. It doesn't mean we're going to cross lines. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But we are like a plane flying, as Viktor Frankl taught. He was a novice pilot, and he would talk about, it's called crabbing, I think, but you're off course like 95% of the time, and you're constantly making adjustments to get back on course. You've got to know where you're going. You've got to have a destination. You've got to have a why. What he talks about in Man's Search for Meaning, I think I do talk about it in here too, is that you could tell when a Holocaust prisoner was at the beginning of the end. How could you tell? Because they would smoke their cigarettes. Why was that a tell that a man is about to die? Because that cigarette could have been used in exchange for a piece of bread or a little, pea in a soup, or even as just a symbol of hope. And what he says was, the moment a man gave that in, turned it over, gave it up, he was as good as dead, because he had lost his why. Whys are our North Star. They are anchor points. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about, really how to dig in and find your why. But when the storms come, and if they haven't come, here's what you can bank on. I promise you, they will. The darkness will descend. And when it does, it's too late to cobble together a why. A man must have his why thought about and really owned and mastered, both written, but also internalized and explored and worked with. It's like a muscle. And you could get me to talk about my why for the next 24 hours, nonstop, uninterrupted. I wouldn't need food. I wouldn't need sleep. I might need a little water, but that's about it, because it is my life force. It is my passion. I live it, I love it, and I share it, because it is the salvation of a man. There's a teaching by Parker Palmer about, it's in his book, The Courage to Teach, maybe. I can't remember which book, but Parker Palmer says, back in the day, in the 1800s, in the Midwest, where I grew up, there were blizzards, and they were whiteout conditions. And farmers had to go from their house to the barn to check on the cows or the horses. And there were stories of farmers freezing to death out in the cold. And after the storm settled, they found them like 20 feet from their house, but they couldn't find their way back in the whiteout, and they lost their way. So what they eventually did was they'd tie a rope around themselves to the house, and then they'd go to the barn. That's your why. You must have a why tied to you, so that when you are out in the storms of life, you have an anchor point. You have a pathway home. I talk about it in the book. One of my anchor points was that I would never believe, when I was a rabbi, I was a rabbi for 20 years all in, and I would never believe the bullshit, because in that position as clergy, people are going to say amazing things about you, right? Almost like to the level of idolatry worship about you. And they're going to say the opposite of that, the worst things about you. And I made a promise to myself that I would never believe it. And the moment I started to believe it, that was my time to get out. When I couldn't stave it off anymore, when it was too much, when it was creeping into not what do I do, but who I am, chapter 2, then it was time for me to go. And there were these moments after services on a Saturday when the crowds would go home, and we had crowds. Anybody watching from Shirat Hayam? And we had some crowds. We had energy. We had what we call the revolution of Jewish spirit. We had hundreds, 500 people there with just a crazy, experience. And I would go to my study afterwards, and I would just sit, and I would be in quiet, and I would always go to the mirror. in my study. I had a bathroom. I would go to the mirror and I would check in with myself to make sure that the guy in the glass was still there, that the guy in the glass was still true, that he wasn't losing himself in the accolades and in the criticisms. And eventually, I started to lose myself. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep that mask from melting into not what I do, but who I am. And I knew it was time to go. And that's okay. Everything has a shelf life. We can't do everything forever. And so I knew it was time to go. So part of my why was truth. And if I couldn't see the truth, tell the truth to myself anymore, then it was time to pull the ripcord and move on. And we did. But the bottom line is, if you don't have a why, if you don't have your values clearly defined and articulated, that when you go into those situations, and that's a proactive, positive one, you're going to lose yourself. When you go into a situation where people are throwing money at you, right? Money's coming in hand over fist. When I was in the cannabis industry, you could see the players that had their why dialed in and they wanted to do good and be good. And you could see the guys who didn't have a why other than make money. And they were all over the place and they ended up in bad places or caused destruction. There are so many examples of men out into the world, in the world, that lose their why or drift from their why or cut themselves off from their why. And when the moment you do that, it's cut flowers. You are withering and you will die. You will find yourself in harm's way eventually. I can't say strongly enough. Come here often. Why are you here? What's your why? Get back to your why. If you don't have one articulated, it's time. Reach out to me. We can do it. This is the work we do. We'll articulate your why. I share my why now freely and fully. You want to hear it? I am Baruch Halevi, and I've been chosen by you to be an example of what is possible. My purpose for being here is to serve, protect, provide for, honor, and love my wife, my children, my family, my friends, my men, my community, my country, my people. My mission while here is to inspire others through speaking, writing, teaching, guiding, leading them down a path of vision, integrity, courage, compassion, honor, hope, responsibility, meaning, and truth. I will fear no man, I will fear no woman, I will fear no thing, and nothing will stand between me, fulfilling my purpose, realizing my mission, transforming my dreams into my reality. I am Baruch Halevi, warrior, a king, a magician, a lover, a warrior of body, a warrior of mind, a warrior of spirit. I am a warrior Jew. I will warrior through. I have said that minimum once, maximum 3 times a day, every day since my father killed himself 20 years ago. Maybe I created it 19 or 18 years ago. But for the past 18 years, it has been my lifeline because there have been times that I've come up to the brink of my capacity, of my ability to carry the load, of my ability to navigate the darkness. And I didn't want to be generation number 3. My father killed himself. My mother killed herself. And there were times in my life that I came to the brink of my capacity. And I am still here today for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that is my why. And I would go to the mirror. I still go to the mirror and I say it to myself on a daily basis. That is what I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking about uttering the words. I'm not just talking about pretty poetry. I'm talking about the sweat and blood and tears it takes to get into that, to journal every morning, to write about it, to refine it, to dig in through all kinds of different means and modes and ways, to go to men's groups. And that's part of getting to your why. Check out menspeergroups.com. I can't think of a better way to work through to get to your why than with some honest brothers around a table to see you and listen to you and challenge you. And one-on-one work, right? Find a coach, reach out to me. I'd love to be your meaning mentor to work on this stuff. Find somebody, a trusted advisor, a confidant, a brother to do this work. Talk to your spouse, your partner, right? This is the work of a lifetime. I don't care what you do for a living. This is what a man's work truly is, to articulate this, to embody it, to live it and to leave it as a legacy. And that's what chapter 3 is all about. Why are you here? When I was a rabbi, I would do eulogies, of course, kind of comes with the deal. And I calculated that I did over 500 eulogies by the end of my tenure. Um, I think maybe out of 500 of them, I think once or twice I was handed the eulogy by the deceased. Not that would be a miracle. Hallelujah, right? No, I was handed the eulogy posthumously by a loved one from the deceased. That's my wife's line of work and my sister's line of work. They can actually get the message from the dead. That's not my skill set. What's the point of that? Because Tony Robbins said, if your life is worth living, it's worth recording. Record your story. Right? There's Ibn Bachya Pekuda, a Kabbalist, says, our lives are like scrolls. And the Torah that we create, we write upon those scrolls by how we live. Write your life down. Video in this day and age. Record it. And write your own eulogy. No stranger should write your eulogy. It's your story. Tell your story. Don't leave it up to some schmo like me, right? I didn't know this person. Don't assume your family can tell your story, by the way. First of all, I'm not sure that's fair that they have to do this work. I don't think it's really great for people to have to speak at eulogies if they want to grieve, because it's really hard to be in a performance role and to grieve simultaneously, neither here nor there. But to do all that work to craft the perfect eulogy after your loved one dies, do you know how much pressure that is? Do you know how difficult that is? I've written my eulogy. I've written it. It encapsulates my my why statement, my mission statement, but I've expanded it into a eulogy. Curtis Bell, how you doing? No, not sure that's God bless you, Curtis. So I want people to write. I don't want them to write my eulogy. I want to tell my story. I'm going to share my eulogy. I want to tell my why to those who are listening, to charge them, to inspire them, to get them to, as I say, carry my fire. That's how we should live our lives. No brainer, no question. How many people write their own eulogy? So if you're listening to me, write your eulogy. But at the very least, start with your why. It can be simple. Mine's ridiculously, long and extensive. That's 18 years of feature creep. But yours doesn't have to be. It's yours. Write it in however you want. But do memorize it. By the way, I just encourage you to memorize it. I was on a flight from Vegas over spring break, and no, I wasn't, because I was with my kids then. I was by myself recently on a flight, and the plane hit turbulence. And the first thing I do is I recite my why statement, because if I'm going down, if my last moments here are, coming, I want to go energetically. I want to go spiritually on my terms. I will not succumb to fear. I will not leave this world with fear being in my mind and my heart and coming out of my mouth. I will not be a beggar of God. Please, God, save me. Right? That's not my way. I don't believe that is the way. I believe it is, here I am. I'm making my defiant stand. And however this turns out, I'm going forward with purpose, with fulfilling my why, even in this moment. As Viktor Frankl said, until my dying breath. This is a way we transform tragedy into triumph. When we go into it with a why, a defined why, a clear why, and this purpose, I have zero doubt that it transforms tragedy into triumph. I've experienced it in my own life, and I've seen others do it. And as I mentioned, Viktor Frankl is the embodiment of it. So what's your why? This is not an insignificant conversation. I was recently around a guy who's super angry. He was just so angry. I was in a group context, and he's one of these guys where you challenge him lovingly from a good place, and it comes back as a fight. You say something he doesn't agree with, it comes back as a fight. You say something even nice, and it even almost comes back as anger. But here's what I've learned, having guided men for the past 25 years. Men go to anger because it's easy. It's easy for men to feel angry. It is my currency. I can feel angry and I like it. I feel it. I operate with it. It's fuel to me. You know, I'm an Enneagram 8, a challenger on a good day, an 8-hole on a bad day. Thank you, Ariella. And I have spent way too much of my life believing that I'm angry. But you know, this work that I've done, especially over the past few years, is to get underneath the anger. Anger is a survival tactic. Anger is just a little boy who's scared. Understandably, by the way, you have every right to be scared. As I always say, you live on a rock in outer space, whirling and twirling, out of control, out of your control, around a hot ball of fire, and you're waiting to die. Like, that's effing scary. Okay, some people live in fear. Some people live in, believe in if they're successful enough. These are the Enneagram types. 8s believe that if I'm intense enough, if I'm in control, then I will survive. And when I can't be in control, because I'm never in control, neither are you, at least not of anything outside of myself, then I go to anger. And anger is easy. But when I get underneath it, what do I find? I'm afraid. I'm afraid for whatever the situation might be. And so instead of feeling my feelings, I just go to bravado. I go to tough guy. I go to bad boy. I go to anger. But underneath it is a softness, and is a sweetness, and is a vulnerability. And that's what this is about. If I can get to the vulnerable piece of me, then I return to who I am, not this mask that I'm wearing. I return to my why. Everybody's why underneath is to be loved, is to give love, is to be compassionate, is to contribute. Okay, maybe not everybody. I know a few schmucks that it's not, but most people, right? Most of the time, that's how we want to move through the world. But we have defense mechanisms. That's the Enneagram. We put on the mask. And in this chapter 3, what's your why? Come here often, but what's your why? I show you 2 different versions of that. I call him Angry Aaron, who's just pissed. He was a real client of mine back in the day. And he reminded me of Roy Kent from Ted Lasso. I love Ted Lasso. Anybody here love Ted Lasso? Ted Lasso. I'm sorry, Roy Kent was the 8, anger. And you watch him slowly get underneath it. And by the last episode, the very last episode, in fact, the last scene of the last episode was him walking into the therapist's office to get underneath. And that was Angry Aaron. Aaron's wife was dying. She died, but she was dying when I met him. And he just was out of control. And what we had to do was harness the anger. So in chapter 3, we talk about Angry Aaron and harnessing the anger. And one of my favorite mystical Kabbalistic teachings by the Koritzer Rebbe, who says, I conquered my anger long ago. Now I keep it in my pocket. That way, it's there when I need it. Anger is not bad. Anger serves a purpose, right? You want to hear some angry 8s, Enneagram 8s? Martin Luther King was an 8. And I think Mother Teresa was an 8. And the list goes on. Winston Churchill was an 8. And Golda Meir was an 8. Thank God they were angry, because they stood in between us and harm's way. I mean, without Winston Churchill, I as a Jew probably would not be here. So that anger harnessed into resolve, or Martin Luther King harnessed into righteous indignation to fight the worthy fight, right? Serves a purpose. But then we got to put it in our pocket, man. Got to put it away. You got to get underneath the anger and feel your feelings. And Angry Aaron, and as I talk about in the chapter 3 of the book, finally starts to get underneath it. And underneath it, he feels his love for his wife, and he starts to channel it in a constructive way. He became a grief counselor and took his pain to alleviate other people's pain. That became his why. His why was screw the world. And now it was, and by the time, I left him and we parted ways, it was to take my suffering to help other people alleviate their suffering. That's a why. That's a why worth living for. I get the question all the time, do I have one why? No, you don't have one why. It's complex. But in my experience, everybody has their sort of painting, their genre, their style. And that doesn't radically change. Maybe it does. I don't know. But mine has sort of been in on this canvas. And I've been painting with similar colors expressed in different ways. Professionally, I did it as a rabbi, and then I did it as a logotherapist. Now I'm doing it as a men's coach. And they're different hats and they're different sort of roles and they're different skill sets, but I'm weaving the why all throughout that. And then my next iteration, maybe someday I'll be sitting in the nursing home and talking to the people that come to me and doing it in that capacity. But it's always going to be for me to help others discover and live their why, live their purpose. That's part of it. So we're talking about chapter 3 in my newest book, Guy in the Glass, 6 questions to see the man you were meant to be. And this chapter is all about finding your why. The book takes place in a bar. The guy's in there for the first time in his life. He's not picking up anybody. He's actually being asked these questions, though not being picked up. They're questions to elicit in him an opportunity for him to return to the guy in the glass, the true man staring back from the mirror, because he's lost himself. And I set this at the midlife juncture because that's oftentimes when a man realizes that he's strayed. He's strayed from his life. He's strayed from his why. And there's a reckoning. There's an opportunity to really look at it. I love the midlife crossroads because you're still young enough to be powerful, right? You're still in your vigor, but you're far enough along to have gathered wisdom, right? Lots of knowledge and understanding, but not necessarily wisdom. Hit the 40 mark, the 50 mark. And that's, I believe, the greatest time in a man's life if you're willing to go into this and discover your why. Open yourself to roads that you walked down that weren't yours, or that were dead ends, or that were detours, and to have the humility to come back to the starting point, to return. It's not a starting over. You have so much accumulated knowledge and wisdom. I don't regret my detours. I don't regret my straying. I don't regret my falterings and my F-ups. Okay, I do, but the thing I can do about it, except learn from it, make it worthy. Right? When guys sit there and get into the regret and get into the guilt and get into the shame, I'd say you're being selfish, right? You're now taking the pain that you caused somebody and you're using it as an excuse not to right the wrongs, not to do something about it. You want to truly right the wrongs, then take it, carry the pain as a source of fuel so that you can go out there and make somebody's life better, make that person's life better, redeem the situation, transform the tragedy into triumph. That's the midlife crossroads. Somebody once said, midlife is a coming to terms with the dreams that you'll never realize. It's partially true. It is. I wanted to serve in the military. I never did. They don't want me now. And that ship sailed. However, there's another piece of it too. And it's coming to terms with all the things you did that you shouldn't have done and all the things you should have done that you didn't do. And taking that energy, taking that fuel and turning it into fuel for moving forward in the second half of life, to reimagine ourselves, to be the version of ourselves that we wish we were the first time, but we're going to be the second time. That's the power of the midlife crossroads. So there's angry Aaron in chapter 3, and he's one example of shutting down and not moving forward with purpose, with a why. But then there's the other one. I call him indifferent Isaac. And I believe this one is the most dangerous of all. Men who are angry, first of all, I'm comfortable with it and takes one to know one, and I can meet them with that anger and we can harness it. We can channel it. I call it carry the fire. Fire can be destructive or it can be constructive. We got to set down the destructive fire. We've got to carry the constructive fire. But indifference, you know how hard it is to work with a man who's indifferent, who's apathetic, where there's no there, where you just kind of want to shake them to see, like, is anybody home? Do you care that your wife is no longer looking at you the same way? Or worse yet, looking at other people the way she used to look at you, right? Not wanting to see the signs. You know how many guys have sat with me and said, I didn't see it coming, indifferent Isaac. The only way you cannot see it is if you have gone to sleep at the wheel of your life. It happens to all of us in different ways, but there is nothing worse than apathy, than indifference. Another teacher of mine, Elie Wiesel, another Holocaust survivor, said, the opposite of love is not anger, it's indifference. Indifference destroys. The opposite of love is not anger. Anger is a form of love, by the way. It's misguided. But it's energy, right? If you're angry with somebody, you have a relationship with them. It means there's something there. But if you're indifferent, if you're apathetic, that's the quiet killer. And so indifferent Isaac, and whoever you are watching this, because we're all indifferent Isaac in different ways, finding your why is about finding your fire again, finding your vitality, your life force. Sometimes it's a context problem. Sometimes it's a content problem. What do I mean? Oftentimes we're in the wrong context. I lost myself in cannabis. I don't use cannabis. I don't like cannabis. I've never liked cannabis, but I ended up in the cannabis industry. Long story short, I had an opportunity to be a part of a license in Massachusetts at the time. It was legalized as a nonprofit. And I saw an amazing opportunity. We could right the wrongs of this plant. It's a plant. It's not amoral. It's not immoral. It's not moral. It's amoral. It's a plant. It has no morality. What we do with it becomes moral or immoral, right? Grapes are not moral or immoral. They're amoral. You can make kiddush, the blessing over the wine Friday night with the grape, or you can put it in a paper bag and ruin your life and the lives of those around you with the same grape. So the plant was just legalized, and I thought, I want to be a part of social equity because we can right the wrongs of this plant. At the time, I don't know anymore the statistics, but most of the people incarcerated by this plant, marijuana, were African Americans. And most of the people being awarded licenses, certainly in Massachusetts, but most everywhere, were white guys. And that's not just. And so we were part of a process to restore justice. Now, it got really ugly and really complicated. And everybody said they wanted to do good until it became just another commodity. And there was a period of time in there when I'm just like, I didn't set out to be a part of this industry just to be a part of it. And I started to shut down. And there was, a year or two that I was just stuck. Sometimes I call them stuck Stan. I was just stuck. I didn't know which way to go. I didn't know how to get out. I was too far deep into it. It was a fiasco. And I could just feel myself, the life force leaving. I had to change my context. I had to get out. And I left a lot on the table. You know how many guys I talk to say, but I can't leave. I'm vested in this company. And I say to him, is that true? At what point is your soul worth more or less than your stock options? And sometimes a man has to change his context. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's a job. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's a city. However, don't misunderstand me on this. I always tell a man, start where you stand. Do you know how many guys, and we all know stories of guys who say, I'm going to just find a new wife. I'm just going to find a new job. I'm just going to find a new community, one that's younger or better or fill in the blank. And wherever you go, there you are. You take your problems with you. So don't just change your context. Don't just change your situation. First, dig into where you are and go into the content. It's content or content. Go into yourself. Go into the content of your character and of your choices and of your life. This is what Viktor Frankl talks about, and we talk a lot about in it here. Responsibility. Take responsibility, radical responsibility for your life. Stop living as a victim of our circumstances. I was when I was in the cannabis industry. I was a victim of my circumstance. I'm stuck, right? There's nowhere to go. I don't have a way out. Poor me. And then we're going to wrap up with a powerful teaching. And then I got to this place where I can take back my power. I can choose my response. In fact, it's the only thing I can choose. As Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Responsibility. Responsibility. Take back your power to choose your response to whatever circumstances you are enduring. That's yours and yours until your dying breath. The problem is we get stuck in the wrong why. See, there are two types of why. We're talking about what's your why? What's your purpose? What's your reason for being here? There's two types of why, and I talk about it in the book. The other kind of why is, I call it why me, right? How many people have I counseled, and myself included, who have had the shit hit the fan, and we say, why now? Why this? But above all, why me? Why did this happen to me? There's many problems with why me. Number one, it ain't answerable. There's no definitive answer, right? Teacher of mine, Harold Kushner, wrote a book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? Don't know, right? Got a doctoral degrees in this stuff. Don't know. And we become powerless, and we become shut down, and we become, well, stuck Stan and indifferent Isaac in those situations. But there's another way. And it's another teacher of mine, Edith Eger. If you haven't read Edith Eger, she was a Holocaust survivor. She was a student of Viktor Frankl. She was a logotherapist and psychiatrist. And she wrote two books, The Gift and The Choice. And one of her most powerful teachings is this. She said this out of the Holocaust, that victims say, why me? It's natural. We're all going to be victimized by life. You will be, or you have been. You certainly will be. Ain't none of us getting out of this alive. Every single person you love is eventually going to die, hopefully after me. And we're all going to go into a place of being a victim, but that's natural. However, we can take up residence there. We can live there long beyond the expiration date. You know how many people I counseled 10 years later after a death of a loved one, and they hadn't moved forward, right? They're still stuck in the same place, and they use their loved one's death as an excuse to stop loving and to stop living. It's a whole other conversation. But the bottom line is they spent 10 years saying, why me? And what Edith says is you'll end up living in the victimhood. That's why it's called the hood, the victimhood. No good. You want to make the shift, as she says, from victim to survivor, or as I would call it, from victim to victor, Viktor. Victims say, why me? Survivors say, what now? What now is answerable. What now is actionable. What now demands a response. And that is the shift from victim to survivor, from why me to what now. So it's not just about asking why, it's about asking the right why. What's your why? Can you name it? Can you articulate it? But above all, are you living it? Because that's what this is about. The guy in the glass, 6 questions to see the man or woman you were meant to be. That's not even the title, is it? Yeah, that is the title. It's for women too, right? 80% of it is applicable to women, but I did want to focus on men, and I'll tell you why. Because there's a crisis happening with men right now. And there's so many wonderful causes and thinkers and movements out there that are dedicated to women. My wife works with women all day, every day. I see it. I am enamored with it. Women find their way to therapy disproportionately more than men. Women find their way to coaching. Women find their way to support groups. Women find their way to grief groups. Women find their way to volunteering. This is statistically, like, just look it up. It's not even a close second. Men are joiners. Men are lone wolves. Men, I don't care if it's 2026, still have 1966 approaches to how we deal with emotions. And I'm not talking about, talking the talk. I'm about when the shit hits the fan, are you sharing this with your friends? You know how many guys I mentor who I say to them, are you sharing with them the situation with your finances? No, we're golfing. I don't want to. What the hell is it? That's not a friend. That's a buddy. You got golfing buddies. You got poker buddies. You got football buddies. But guys use that as an excuse that they have friends, therefore they don't have to what? Share and get underneath the anger or the fear and feel their feelings. And so men need an outlet. Men need a roadmap. Men need direction. So yes, this is a book for women. It's for you directly, but it's also for you to put into the hands of your men, because men are dying, right? You may know this. This is my cause, the 13-minute mission. It's a nonprofit I started to raise dollars, to raise awareness, to raise inspiration, because, pause, drum roll, every 13 minutes in America, a man dies by suicide. Did you hear me? Every 13 minutes in America, a man dies by suicide. Hang on. 80% of suicides are men. Think about that. If it was the other way around and it was women, and we'd know about it, we'd be wearing ribbons for it. We'd be doing something about it, but we're not. And I don't want to fight with anger. Excuse me. Time to wrap up. I don't want to be angry about it. I don't want to stir up your anger about it. I don't care about anger. I want to be part of the solution. And so what's the solution to the suicide epidemic? And let me pause for a second. It's not just active suicide, right? That's men like my father who kill themselves actively, hang themselves or shoot themselves, or God forbid, all of these things. It's horrific. It's a silent epidemic that's just eating at the fabric of our society. And we don't even talk about it, which is why it's eating at us. Because if we can name it, we can tame it. We can do something about it. But if we don't name it, it has power over us and it has consequences. I'll do a whole talk on that, about how I grew up in that. But if we can give it voice, then we can address it, then we can remedy it. And although all suicides are unique to that man, they all have some things in common. One thing I know that with every ounce of my being that they have in common is that loneliness is in the heart of each man, at least at that moment. I don't care who's around him, how loving this is. I love my father. He killed himself. It's not, I don't blame myself. He couldn't receive my love. He was lonely for 1,000 reasons. Mental health, a part of, not all of them. My father wasn't mentally ill. All kinds of factors, debt and despair and all these things, absolutely unequivocally. But here's the one thing besides loneliness I know every man who kills himself has lost: his why. A man who has his why, his meaning, his purpose, not just written on stationery, but written on his mind and his heart and his soul. And he's reiterating it every day, and he's living it, and he's expressing it, and he's sharing it, doesn't take his life. We have to help men get back to their why. They are adrift, and those are the active suicides, right? Then there's deaths of despair, which is drinking and drinking and driving, but just drinking yourself to death, and drug addictions, and eating yourself to death, right? Diabetes, type 2 diabetes that goes unattended. There's so many ways of deaths of despair. That's passive suicide. Let's just name it for what it is. But then there's another kind, which is a guy who's above ground, but he's not living. And I'm not talking about a guy who's, down on his luck. I deal with these guys all day, every day. I'm talking about a guy who has 7 figures in the bank or bringing 7 figures home in a paycheck annually. I'm talking about he has all the polished, pictures on Facebook for you and all the likes and all of the outward stuff, but inward, he's lost. He's hungry. He's yearning. I work with these men, and when they find their why, they're back. It's not about how much money a man has. Viktor Frankl said, "We have means, but no meaning." We are living in a time of a meaning crisis, of a purpose crisis, of a why crisis. It's being exacerbated by AI. It's being exacerbated by world politics, politics being broadcast all day, every day, and 1,000 other things. But guess what? That's not a reason why we have a why problem, but that's why we need a why. The problem is that we have lost it. We have taken our attention off of it as men. We have spent more time on our work, more time, on the ball games, more time on the activity and the leisure than we have on what's my name and what do I do and why am I here? That's chapter 1, 2, and 3 of my book, The Guy in the Glass, 6 questions to see the man you were meant to be. Jump over to theguyintheglass.com. By the way, in this book, there's a QR code, and the QR code you can scan. You'll get the workbook and you'll get the audio book. For at least a limited time, I'm giving away the audio book until it's 100%. Forgive me, it's like 98%. But the bottom line is it's a complimentary. There's a QR code if you buy the book, any form, the Kindle, the softback, and the hardback. So jump over to guyintheglass.com, get my book, reach out to me, b@bhalevi.com. Jump into a men's peer group, go to menspeergroups.com. These are great ways to discover your why, to articulate your why, to live your why. And until the next time, live your why. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you in the next live.